Minister, can I start by saying that we are at a very important point in the battle against COVID. In fact, I would argue we are at a critical point in relation to suppressing this virus. And we've had debates in this chamber on a range of different ingredients to how we keep driving down community transmission and then keeping the numbers low. And that includes having a first-class test and trace system. It obviously includes sufficient checks and controls at ports and airports, and we have disagreements in those areas, as you know. But front and centre has to be the rollout of the vaccine. And I can tell you that everybody in this state and everybody in this chamber wants that process to be a success, because it is a route out of the current crisis that we are in, and it provides people hope and gives people hope that we'll have some level of normality back in our lives in the next number of months. But it has to be said, Minister, there are problems, and it is our job to raise those problems with you. And those problems are not just on the supply side, but there has been some problems on the supply side. We're hearing that some countries like Denmark and Hungary and Austria are ahead of us in relation to their population being vaccinated. Those countries have hit a target of 9%, we're on 6%. There's reports of some countries that are going outside of the EU procurement process and are doing side deals and additional deals with pharmaceutical companies, and yet there's no sense that there's any additional vaccines coming our way in this state. There was issues last week, and a lot of it was anecdotal evidence, but I spoke to many GPs who did not receive their vaccines on time, and it was right across the state. County Monaghan particularly was bad, but there was many examples, and I dealt directly with GPs and with the HSE trying to resolve the problems. And that was problematic, and it showed that if there are problems at that level, when we're only rolling it out for the over 85s, what will happen when we get to the general population rollout? So there are problems, and I'll get to some of those in a moment, Minister. There's also issues in relation to transparency and daily reporting. We're still not getting sufficient information to give us confidence that there is absolute transparency in relation to the numbers of vaccines in, the number of people vaccinated, and then the number of vaccines which are in storage on a daily or weekly basis. And the absence of that information and transparency, in my view, is problematic. We have mixed targets, which we saw this week, were targets that were not met, and we have some groups, such as carers and others, who are not defined as a distinct cohort in and of themselves. These are all real problems that are being raised with us, Minister, on a daily basis. So I have a number of questions for you, and the first is in relation to the procurement side of it. Many EU states have now gone outside of the current EU procurement process. Can you confirm that has happened? And can you answer to me and to people watching this why it is the case that we are not looking to increase supply as well? If other countries are able to do it, why is it not possible for this state to be able to do it? I want solidarity across the European Union. I want global solidarity. But when people watch other member states going outside of the process, including Germany, they're asking reasonable questions. What is the Irish government doing? What are you as Minister for Health doing? Are you being proactive enough in relation to ensuring that we maximise the supply side of the vaccine? So, as a first question, can I put that to you, Minister? Is it the case that other member states have gone outside of the process? Is that allowed? And if it is, what are we doing about it in terms of increasing the supply side for this state?
Thank you, Deputy Minister.
Thank you very much, Deputy, for the question and for your remarks. The information I have is that a very small number of EU countries are looking at going outside the EU process. You reference Hungary, for example. My understanding is that they've elected to use a vaccine that hasn't been authorised by the EMA. So I would hope one thing that we would all agree on in the House is that regardless of where the vaccines come from, that we would stick to vaccines that are authorised by the EMA. So it's a very small number. If you look at the table for the EU of countries in the EU and the total doses administered per population, what you'll find is that Ireland has been consistently very close to the top of that. That's because we are getting them out as quickly as they're coming in, and we're drawing down the total number of vaccines that are available to us through the process. And as I said in the opening remarks, we've now advanced purchase for nearly 18.5 million doses. However, I think your question is a very reasonable one, and one I have engaged with the task force on as well, to see are there legitimate mechanisms in parallel with the EU process whereby we could secure vaccines that are validated, obviously, and that have been authorised by the EU. But I think it is just worth restating that the process we're going through so far, I know there's a frustration all around the world in terms of everybody wants as many vaccines as quickly as possible. It has given us access to a level of vaccine which many people tell me simply would not have been possible had we tried to go it on our own.
Thank you. And can I come to the reporting, Minister, the daily reporting and the transparency? Can I ask why it is the case that even at this point that we don't have, even on a weekly basis, information in relation to how many vaccines arrived, how many vaccines have been administered and how many are in storage? I think that would give people confidence as well, and it would ensure that we have full transparency. Yes, there is some reporting, but it doesn't go far enough. So can I ask you, would you commit to reviewing that issue and enhancing the reporting to ensure that we can say to people that the vaccines that are coming in, people are getting vaccinated as quick as possible, and that there isn't a situation where we have any amount of vaccines in storage?
Yeah, thanks, Deputy. I certainly can commit to talking to the task force and talking to the HSE on this. I think if I may just respectfully push back a little bit here. I take your point. You're asking about supply coming in, and we will look at that. In terms of the doses administered, though, I think in fairness to the people who are running the programme, the House asked for weekly numbers and then daily numbers. I committed to that, and that was done. They go up online every day. I asked for them to be put onto the Tracker app as well so people could access them. And the members of the Oireachtas are getting a daily briefing on exactly those numbers as well. So I think in fairness to the teams running this, a lot of effort has been done. And of course, if there's more information the House would like, I will endeavour to make that available.
Questions I want to get through, Minister, and I thank you for your brevity in responding. Can I ask you the question in relation to GPs over the last number of weeks, and some of them who claimed that they did not get their vaccines in time, and many of us were contacted by relatives of older people, some in their 90s, who were in GP surgeries expecting to get their vaccine and it didn't happen. Do you have numbers of how many reported cases of GPs that were due to get their vaccines on a certain day and it didn't happen? Because that, I'm sure, will be valuable information for you so that we can learn lessons as we move on to the next numbers of cohorts. So is that data available, and do you know how many reported cases of GPs who were due to receive their vaccine on a certain day and it didn't happen?
Thank you for that, Deputy. And just to your previous point, I am publishing right now the deliveries to date for the Oireachtas. So by the end of this session, or indeed during this session, the latest figures, I believe, for the start of this week will be available. And I certainly would like to see that published on a weekly basis for the very reasons you've given. With regards to the GPs, there's about 1,300 GP practices involved, and it was ramping up over a 3-week period. The latest information I have as of this morning, if you'll bear with me for 1 second, Deputy, is that approximately 65 of the GP practices, and they were practices with below 200 patients over the age cohort, weren't buddying up for various reasons. My understanding is they were smaller GP practices. In some cases, due to location, it was very difficult for them to buddy up. So they're all being contacted today and tomorrow, and a delivery plan has been put in place that they all get their deliveries next week. And then secondly, there is a group, my understanding is, of about 25 other practices with very small numbers of patients over 70. The HSE is engaging with them. But I would say, Deputy, that while the vast majority of the GP clinics got the deliveries, they might not have got them on exactly the day, but got the deliveries, there was a small number. There were some issues in that supply chain, and the HSE is working hard to resolve it.
Can I put my remaining questions to you, Minister, in just one block if I can? And can I ask you to outline to the House what is the new target date for all of the over 85s being vaccinated? And what is the new target date for all of the over 70s? because we're now hearing that some other countries in Europe may now use the AstraZeneca vaccine. So can you inform the House today when it is that all the over 70s in this state will be vaccinated? We hear that Britain are now examining the possibility of a third jab in relation to the vaccine in the autumn. Is that something that is being considered in this state? And also people who are housebound. And I welcome the move as well, by the way, as somebody who first raised this issue in relation to people who have underlying medical conditions, and that's starting next week. Some of those will also be housebound. Some of the older people are housebound, and there's questions in relation to GPs. So if you can answer GPs being part of that, if you can answer that question.
Minister.
Thank you, Deputy. So the target for the first dose for the over 85s is for the vast majority of them to have been done by the end of this week, which was the target. As I said, there's a small number of GP practices, for the reasons I just gave, that didn't get their deliveries this week, and they will get their deliveries next week. And then to the point you've raised before around the housebound, the good news on that is, so GPs will be able to, and I believe are already going to do house visits. The National Ambulance Service is being used as well. There was a question at the start as to whether or not the mRNA vaccines could be transported a second time. The clinical advice now is that they can be. And to your question, Deputy, on the over 70s, I think actually the answer is partly in the second part of your question. I think you quite rightly point out that some countries are now electing to use AstraZeneca for the over 70s. There is emerging evidence from UK studies that NIAC is looking at the moment. At the moment, the clinical advice remains that the mRNA vaccines would be used for the 70s and older. However, NIAC is always looking at the emerging evidence, and certainly if it would be the case that if they advised, as per France, for example, I believe is now going above 65, it would certainly accelerate the dates. Which means, to your final question as to when the end date for that cohort will be, as with so much in this programme, it depends. It depends on the clinical advice. It depends on the deliveries coming in.